we're going to provide the ISSofBC update, Afghan Special Initiative, and I'm Jennifer.
I'm Kathy. Technology. There we go.
So first off, we would also like to acknowledge the land that we are gathered is the unceded territories of the Tsleil-Waututh, Kwantlen, Squamish, and Musqueam Nation. It's important to take the time to acknowledge, and with tomorrow, the first National Truth and Reconciliation Day, to acknowledge the history before colonization, understanding Canada's history through the Indigenous lens, and also how we, as a group, as individuals, can work together with the Indigenous population.
And for me, it's important to reaffirm my commitment each time I do a land acknowledgement to continuing the journey I'm on of learning, of understanding, of learning new histories that I may not have seen, and to doing my part to really work against and to work to overcome the structural barriers that have been reinforced by privileges that I have enjoyed.
So a little bit about ISSofBC. It was created in 1968 by volunteers and incorporated in 1972 in direct response to Ismailis fleeing East Africa. We are the first immigrant serving agency in BC and one of the largest multicultural immigrant serving agency in Canada. We pioneered settlement service, host programs, and refugee reception in BC. We're the third refugee resettlement center in BC. We have served over 25,000 clients in a year in over 45 languages. We have over 16 locations, as well as secondary locations where we deploy staff in different community partners. We have 400 staff and volunteers. We are both a charity NGO, and our board of directors are volunteers selected from a broader community. So the objective for us today to have present is to help understand the refugee process and identify some unique aspects of the Afghan Special Initiative that impacts resettlement in Canada. We also want to provide updates of the Afghan arrivals to BC, and as well, provide suggestions, ways that you can support the Special Initiative.
So we recognize that participants in today's webinars may come from a wide variety of backgrounds and knowledge in terms of refugee resettlement in Canada. So we wanted to provide an overview that speaks to all groups. Frequently, we talk about refugees in the media, in everyday conversations, without necessarily understanding what a refugee is. So we wanted to begin today with an understanding of the legal definition of a refugee. There's two documents, the UNHCR Convention on Refugees in 1951 and the 1967 protocols form the basis of international refugee law. According to Article 1 of the Convention, refugees are people who are outside of the countries because of a well-founded fear of persecution based on race, religion, nationality, political opinion, or membership in a particular group, and who cannot or do not want to return home. There's three necessary preconditions contained within that definition. First, persecution is based on one of the 5 categories. Second, the individual has crossed an international boundary. And third, the individual is unable or unwilling to seek protection from their home country. And as we'll see in the case of the Afghan Special Initiative specifically, some of the ways in which the initiative has unfolded have impacted how refugees have been received in Canada and the process to date. Generally, when we look at migration, forced migration involves 4 broad stages. A crisis occurs, prompting movement, either internally within a country or crossing an international boundary. And given our focus on refugees today, we're going to focus on those who cross an international boundary. Temporary protection is sought generally within a neighboring country, either in refugee camps or in urban areas. And designation as a convention refugee may be done on an individual basis, looking at an individual case, or in cases such as the Afghans, where refugee status can be afforded on a prima facie or a group basis. The United Nations High Commissioner on Refugees has identified 3 durable or lasting solutions: repatriation once the situation is stabilized, local integration into the neighboring country, or permanent resettlement to a third country such as Canada. Countries who provide third country resettlement then select individuals based on government identified criteria. So for example, in Canada, we select refugees who have been deemed eligible for permanent resettlement based on urgent need for protection. And this includes individuals with physical or mental health issues, with women, LGBTQ, children, seniors. Generally, this process can take years. Some refugees have been in refugee camps for decades. The crisis in Afghanistan and the need for rapid extraction of individuals associated with Canada prompted conditions of migration that have impacted both the stages of refuge and early arrival and settlement in Canada. Generally, movement across international borders, which again is a precondition to meet the international definition, is taken by individuals. But in this case, movement across that international border was facilitated by the Government of Canada and other countries globally through military interventions, as well with temporary protection being provided either in hotels in Toronto, and individuals under this special initiative are eligible for resettlement. So when we look at Canada's refugee program, it has two broad streams: overseas protection, where convention refugee status is granted prior to their arrival in Canada, or inland claims, where individuals who have come to Canada seek legal recognition as a convention refugee. People who come as convention refugees have the right to permanent residence through one of three categories. And really the difference between the three categories, government-assisted refugees, blended visa office referred, and privately sponsored refugees, is about who provides the 1 year of financial assistance, which is roughly equal to provincial income assistance, and who provides immediate support. And this includes finding permanent accommodations, help in applying for identification and benefits, connecting them to medical settlement and other supports. So looking at this and just being mindful of our time, we will share the slides and you can see generally really what we're looking at right now and talking about today is individuals who will become government-assisted refugees. Refugee claimants is another group, and they navigate the legal and settlement processes simultaneously. They may be eligible for some limited settlement and integration supports, and they are eligible for provincial income assistance. Where this is important is we want to talk about how the Afghan Special Initiative has played out to this point. The rapid extraction and movement of Afghans to Canada has created some early complexities in terms of the settlement process during the first few weeks and really over the last month. Given the need to respond urgently, it wasn't possible for individuals to complete the required immigration processes, medical exams, etc., prior to their arrival in Canada. Rather, out of necessity, people were put on planes as quickly as possible. Individuals were brought to Canada under something called the Urgent Protection Program, which allows Canada to be able to respond to urgent requests by refugees who are under threat of being returned home, of expulsion, or of facing direct threats to their lives. UPP cases are designated as government-assisted refugees once the processes are complete in Canada. In this case, all of the early arrivals, these processes were done in Toronto in one of 4 identified hotels, with onward destining to communities based in part on the presence of family or friends in those areas. So where their immigration processes or medical exams would normally be done prior to Canada, as well as gathering information on where people, do they have family or friends in Canada, This all had to be done in Toronto prior to the notification of arrival being sent to communities across Canada. This has caused some delays and some challenges in terms of sharing information because the situation was highly fluid, where it wasn't always clear that even though people were in, for example, the BC Yukon designated hotel, that didn't mean they were going to end up in British Columbia. And in fact, in the end, about 1 in 4 people who were in the BCY hotel actually came to BC. Additional challenges have been created because as the rapid extraction was being done in Afghanistan, it didn't just include people who were coming as government-assisted refugees. It included Canadian citizens, permanent residents, and blended families where different individuals have different statuses. Many arrived without even a change of clothes. So as they were trying to get onto planes, we had planes arriving in Toronto that may have had hundreds of people with 50 backpacks. In Canada, when you have different statuses, you have different eligibility for programs and supports. And this includes everything from monthly financial supports to ability to access provincial health coverage without a waiting period, and even the airfare costs to get from Toronto to the destination community. At this point, blended families remain largely in Ontario and are not expected, at least within the first cohort of arrivals, to come to BC unless they have family here. This may change. The province of BC is waiving that 3-month residency requirement for the blended families.
So I'm going to talk about Resettlement Assistance Program overall. But one thing to note as well with the Afghans that arrived in Toronto, part of this process was done in Toronto, as well as we're also in COVID. So during that time in Toronto, they were in quarantine. So what typically happens when government-assisted refugees arrive to BC? They arrive, they are welcomed by CAN at the airport. They are put into a taxi where they are driven to temporary accommodations, such as Welcome Center. And then they are provided with one night's some money for food and given a chance to rest. As you can imagine, someone who's just flown in, jet lag, being overwhelmed, this change man, being in a new place, giving them time and space to rest. The next day, we start beginning to provide services. We provide intake, which is done with the first language counselor, and start beginning to have bank forms filled out, consent forms so that we can collect and then get their information, understanding what their needs and assets, doing sort of a NARS, a needs and assets assessment. They're also going to meet with a housing search worker. So we provide them with housing orientation to give them a realistic understanding of what housing looks like in British Columbia. And during the time that they're staying in temporary accommodation, they receive food cash. Often we try to have units, we have units that have kitchens. So this allows them to have the empower to go and buy groceries and then cook the foods that they prefer. During day 3 to 14, this is when we begin the orientation. So orientation might be the basic orientation, understanding living in BC. For some, it might be understanding living in certain accommodations, budgeting, understanding the budgets and how much money is required in BC or in Canada, as well as mentioned, housing orientation. We have a workshop for coping for change and helping them, understand change, change management, being in a new environment, and just looking at their overall well-being as well. There is also Immigration, Refugee, and Citizenship Canada does their intake, which begins the process of providing financial supports for the year. Banking is also completed. There is the primary health as well, doing medical tests, checking to see what type of health issues that they may require or supports that may be needed. And then it's looking for housing. And I think that's the important piece because housing allows them to actually settle and begin their new life. They're not staying in a temporary accommodation. They are in the community, able to work, go to school, take language classes. And through our needs assessments, need and asset assessments, we identify what their needs are so we can make referrals to community partners, to settlement agencies, resources, schools. And then they sign the housing lease and furniture is ordered and provided to them when they move into their house. So what are some of the things that are completed? The IRCC processing and destining, so completing the paperwork to provide them with permanent residence status, as well as destining to different parts of Canada, such as BC or Vancouver. They've done the immigration medical exam. They have confirmation of permanent residency. Their social insurance number forms have been applied, and most of them have started to receive that, as well as most have received their first COVID vaccination, whether it's overseas in Afghanistan, but a lot of them were also provided that in Toronto. They were provided with tablets to access services. Because they were in a quarantine, they were not able to leave the rooms for quarantine purposes. So tablets was provided to them, so they were able to access online virtual supports. And then initial orientation and basic needs. What needs to continue as they arrive to BC is doing the needs assessments, applying for MSP, child tax benefit, GST, having the IRCC intake so that they can receive their first check, opening a bank account, finding permanent accommodations, and then making referrals to resources in the community based on their needs and situations.
So what we thought we'd do for the remaining part is really speak to some of the information and updates about who is arriving in BC and beginning to give some information about this group. So in total, 300 Afghan GARs in 78 family units have arrived in Metro Vancouver from Toronto under the Afghan Special Initiative. We received word this morning, we are expecting another 4 family units and 14 individuals over the next 2 weeks. At this point, looking forward, we anticipate multiple modes of arrival for future GARs through the special initiative. So again, to date, everybody who has arrived has come through the Toronto hotels and the centralized quarantine. Moving forward, there's going to actually be 2 centralized port of entries and quarantine hotels. One will be opened in Calgary, and this is for individuals who are transiting through the United States. So individuals for whom in the rush to get on planes, they, instead of Canada, have ended up in the United States. So any individuals who are coming through that group will arrive into Calgary for onward destining after the quarantine. And Toronto, and this is for others who are arriving through the special initiative. Because of the nature of the Afghan Special Initiative and recognition that people may not always be coming through the expected channels, CBSA has also been alerted Canada Border Services agencies in terms of contact information for individuals who arrive of their own accord, who make their own way to Canada, to be connected with the appropriate civil supports. Looking at who are the arrivals, we've had an opportunity to take a look at some of the analysis from the needs and assets assessments that have been done on 53 of the family units who have arrived. And that includes 53 head of households and 35 spouses. So who are the arrivals? Approximately 57% of all of the arrivals to BC to date are under the age of 19. So one of the connections that we are making as people are in hotels is around the school system and the Ministry of Education to make sure that we're able to connect students to the school system as quickly as possible. There's a relatively even distribution of men and women within the first groups. One of the interesting things to us was this expectation that people had prior connections to Canada. When we look at the individuals who arrived in British Columbia, 66% indicated they have no prior relationship with Canada. And of those who do, it was in a range of previous occupations for either themselves or family members, including journalists, project coordinators, biometrics officers, translators, and security guards. Approximately 55% of the individuals speak Dari as a primary language, followed by Pashto and Farsi. And in further follow-up, a small number of the principal applicants also speak Urdu and Hindi. And among the spouses, there was a number who also speak Urdu. So some of the questions around overall wellness. Overall, 82% of the head of households rated the overall wellness in their family as being either good or satisfactory. In looking at the responses around individuals who indicated the health was not good, it was a need around follow-up for ongoing pre-existing ailments. Requested information around distress services, recognizing that as people were in quarantine hotels and they were in hotels in Canada, rapid evacuation and in quarantine, while watching all of the events unfold in Afghanistan, we had actually taken the opportunity to provide some mental health supports through group counseling in Toronto. But through the NARS process, individuals were also asked about if they required more information and connections to distress services. 23% of the head of households indicated they would like information of this, noting a variety of issues, including anger management, mental health, depression, and a need for counseling. Just over half of head of households indicated a need to see a family doctor for themselves or their family members. And the same was true for 40% of the head of households in terms of the need to see a dentist. The majority have indicated they don't have conditions which require assistive devices, so wheelchairs, canes, or other medical supports. And with respect to vaccinations, Jennifer mentioned COVID vaccinations were offered in Toronto. We continue to work with health authorities here to make sure people have access to any and all of the appropriate vaccinations. Over 95% indicated they are partially or fully vaccinated for COVID, either in Canada or pre-arrival. So we're working with local health authorities to better understand vaccinations that occur outside of Canada in cases where information on doses or timing are not known. And this relates in part to the vaccine passport. So as we understand that, also helping the new arrivals to obtain their vaccine passports. So language, we asked 3 broad questions around literacy. One looking at English language literacy, the ability to read and write in first language, and around digital literacy. Most families have at least one person who speaks English, though there are some family units where this is not the case. There's 10 households, for example, where neither the principal applicant nor the spouse reported an ability to speak English. English language proficiency varied significantly between the principal applicants and the spouses. 64% of principal applicants report speaking some level or report some level of English language proficiency around reading, writing, understanding, compared to spouses where 91% of the spouses reported no English language proficiency. Although there was no principal applicants or spouses who reported an ability to read, write, or understand French, there was one principal applicant who's interested in further learning in French. 85% of principal applicants and 100% of the spouses indicated they'd like to attend language training once they're settled in their new community. And we are working with IRCC in terms of exploring the ability to do language assessments prior to move out for those individuals who are still in temporary accommodations. Looking at the principal applicants, 91% reported they can read and write somewhat or well in first language, compared to spouses where 31% reported they cannot read or write in first language. Looking at digital literacy, over 60% of the principal applicants and the spouses report being comfortable with technology. The principal applicants were over twice as likely to report digital literacy, with 75% compared to 37% of the spouses.
So who are the arrivals? About 45% of the family units have 5 or more people. We have had 16 family units with 54 individuals who have found permanent accommodations. And so they have moved to Surrey, Burnaby, Coquitlam, New West, Port Coquitlam, Delta. So that's about 18% of the Afghan arrivals to date.
This remains one of our biggest challenges. So we continue to implore people, if you're aware of housing that meets income assistance rates of a variety of sizes, please get in touch with us. Looking for permanent accommodations as opposed to transitional. And in part, that's because we want people in communities, in housing, rebuilding their lives as quickly as possible.
And so one of the ways to help is permanent accommodation. The other thing is providing, gift cards to different settlement agencies, including ours, where we're able to distribute it to individuals as they move out based on what their needs are. And I think the other piece is creating welcoming communities. It's to help dispel myths about refugees. It's helping building a welcoming community, helping work and share together knowledge to others who may not be familiar with refugees.
I think, in any time, we know that provincial income assistance rates, while they have increased, that it can be difficult to survive on those rates. One of the things, again, just pointing out with the gift card request in this, is because of the speed of the extraction, people left without, in many cases, even a change of clothes. So while they are receiving startup allowance, they're receiving clothes, the needs may be far greater than what we've seen in the past among other groups.
And so for us, we will be sharing additional information and training. So one of the places to seek information is our website. We do have a link there offering different updates of arrivals or even just resources about refugees, as well as the BC Refugee Hub, a great resource to learn and understand more about refugees coming to BC.
And we are anticipating, and Bahar is a part of this, releasing updated statistics on Fridays on both of those means. Thank you. So we're going to turn it over to Jean.
Thanks, Kathy. Thanks, Jennifer. And I'll just let you know that today I am coming to you from the territories of the Lekwungen speaking people, the Songhees and Esquimalt First Nations. And like many other organizations in our world, we are very happy to commit to do our part in the achieving reconciliation. And our staff will be off tomorrow and participating in many activities. So I just wanted to do two things. One is to sort of give you a bit of an update about what's happening in Victoria. I looked at who's with us today, and I see some familiar faces, so I'd sure would like to know a little more. And also to give you a bit of a sense of the national scope and what's going on in different places. In one of the hats I wear is as a rep to the National Refugee Assistance Program Working Group. I'm the BC rep for the moment. At some point, it will go back to ISS again. And in that role, we've been meeting since these announcements were made to try and coordinate. So there is a, through the RAP working group, there is a website that should be up on Friday that just to sort of centralize if people across the country have questions about the program and about what's happening and how they can help, they can go through that resource, and they are in fact forwarding information to ISS and to the other lead organizations in the various provinces across the country. So we know that with the number of people who've come in through Toronto, it's a fairly small number who've arrived in BC. Many of them, as Kathy mentioned, wanted to stay in the Greater Toronto area. It is the intention of the government that people go to all the RAP centers at this point, the 34 RAP centers across Canada, some in big cities and some in smaller centers like Victoria or Brandon or Moose Jaw. And they are trying to encourage people to go. It's a large number of people we'll see coming in. The current commitment, not just for GARS, but for the whole program, is 20,000, or initially was 20,000 over 2 years. So it's not expected that everybody will arrive in this first rush. People will arrive over time. Some of them will be government assisted refugees, and some will come under the private sponsorship program, which is another way, of course, that people can help. And at this point, as I say, most have stayed, the vast majority have stayed in Toronto, but people are going out to the other centers. So we're expecting to see people in Victoria, for example, not yet, but we are expecting to see people start to come probably within a few weeks. And I'll mention that, you know, I think this is true in Vancouver as it is for us in Victoria, is we also have had other government assisted refugees arriving. Because of COVID, their travel was held up, and it just basically in the summer, they really started to flow. So we've got a number of people who are currently in temporary housing, and we're also working to get them into permanent residence as soon as we can, or permanent housing as soon as we can, exactly, so that they can really start their lives, get their children enrolled in school, and get going with the various things that will help them settle well. So we are also, you know, in the mode of really making an appeal for that. I want to say just a few things about the interest in the program and the numbers of people who are keen to be helpful. So for private citizens, we know that there's a number of people who are either connected to journalistic functions, to people who are veterans who were in Afghanistan, who have put their hands up and expressed an interest in being helpful. So all the organizations and all of us are working to make sure that we connect with them so that we can vet them, because all of us have ways to do intake for volunteers, just to make sure that people are okay connecting with vulnerable clients. And so we want to go through those processes and expedite those so that they can, when people arrive, they're ready here to help. And we really appreciate that that kind of interest. So, but it does take us a little time. So we encourage people to get in touch with us as soon as they can, so that we can, you know, work through the process together and that they can be ready when they come. There's the government's also working on with a number of corporate entities in terms of assistance that they might be able to help out with, whether it's in temporary housing, whether it's in transportation. There's a lot of interest from employers across the country. And although we know, and this is one of the things I just would sort of want to, it's better for people to get their feet in the ground in permanent housing. That is our first priority in the RAP program. And then we know that employers will be very interested in helping out with employment where that's appropriate for people. And we also want people to have a chance to get into classes so they can improve their English. You saw from the stats that Kathy showed the kind of need there will be there. I did notice in one of the questions, there was a question about, you know, is IRCC contemplating increasing resources for language classes? And the answer that I've heard is yes, they're well aware that they're going to need to be some adjustments. So if you are seeing the need for that in your area, they're asking you to get in touch with your contract officer and get that kind of help. So I think maybe I'll stop there, and I think we can go to questions and see what people are interested in hearing about.